Okay, today is July 26, 2022, and my name is Adolfo, and I'm here today with my colleagues.
Sebastiano, Cocco.
Courtney Boyd.
All right, and we're here as part of the Mississippi Freedom Project 2022, and today we have the pleasure to meet.
My name is Tyrisha Battle, and I am the Executive Director of Holly Springs Tourism and Recreation Bureau.
All right, Tyrisha, well, thank you for making time today and coming over to be here with us today and be part of this interview. So before we dive into the organization and everything, I would like to learn a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your history, your parents' history. So if you could tell us, where are you from? Where were you raised?
Okay, well, I originate from California. And that's where I had the majority of my youth, my younger years, until I turned about 15, and my parents relocated to Illinois. And my parents are both pastors of Grace Deliverance Outreach Ministries in Aurora, Illinois. They've been in ministry for about 30 years. And so I'm a total PK. I am a preacher's kid, and they say that we're the worst, but I think that we just get better with time. I just celebrated my 46th birthday on July 16th, and so I'm excited about that. I am married to Walter Battle. My husband, I met in Illinois, but he originates from Holly Springs. And so over the course of over 28 years of us being together, we would visit Holly Springs. And in or around 2012, I decided that I wanted to move here. And then we relocated in 2013. So we've been here since, as a matter of fact, it came up in my memories today on social media that today was the day that we went to Olive Branch to the Holiday Inn Express so that we can come to Holly Springs to get our keys to our place that we were renting at the time. Okay. And so it's absolutely 9 years now. So, my husband was born and raised here in Holly Springs. He lived in Marshall County up until he turned about 19. We have a pretty big age gap. My husband was born in 1960, I 1976. And we, of course, were born in two separate parts of the country or the world, of the United States primarily. And I say that because our idealism about life and things were totally different. I never, I went to school with every nationality known to man. I didn't know nor experience racism of any sort. The school system in California was, especially in the 80s and the 90s, it was top notch. I mean, I got great education. I went to Polytechnical High School for my 9th grade year. We were on computers in 3rd grade, so I just never knew. I mean, when I say I went to school with every national, I'm talking about Cambodian, white, black, Mexican, Puerto Rican, I mean, every nationality. And so I didn't have the sensibility of knowing the divide. Even though we read in history books in that period that racism exists, I never felt it until I moved to Illinois. And people think that the South is relatively much more racist, but I tell you, they're nice racists here, much more than the North. And it's really, I was 15. I had my first child at 15. I do have 5 kids. I negated to say that. My oldest daughter's 30. And then I have a 28, I have a 22, 21, and then 17. And so I can remember, being a 15-year-old pregnant with that, back in that time that happened relatively often, teenage pregnancies and different things like that. I can remember my mom forbade me to go to public aid. She says, you're going to get a job and you're going to work and, you will not be on anybody's public assistance. And I snuck down to the public aid office, me and my daughter. And I remember her being in her little car seat. And a white lady sat next to me. Now, my daughter had really, just like her hair is, really fine hair like that. Black baby, but really fine hair. And the lady sitting next to me, she says, I have never seen a little colored child with hair like that. And I said, colored child? Like, who said? I went home, told my mom, and I was like, Mom, somebody called Lene colored. I never heard that term used before. And so that was my first introduction to, how people think of you by the color of your skin. Because I never had experienced that. So nonetheless, my husband would often tell me, racism exists. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. I'm waltzing in the meadows. I love everybody. I think everyone's great. I think everybody thinks that I'm great because I am, and he would give me rude awakenings like, don't you see? Don't you understand? And I'm thinking, no, that's just you. This is not 1960, I don't live in that kind of world. And so, nonetheless, our ideology concerning that has always been strained. Because what I view as just people, you can dislike someone. You don't have to, I don't think it's because the color of their skin. That was my interpretation. But the reality is that it is true. And so back in 2012, when I told my husband I was going to cash in my 401k, I was working, I was the human resources manager at the time at a company in Aurora. And I said that I want to move to Mississippi. And his first thing, I ain't moving to Mississippi. And I'm like, why? He was like, nothing's changed there. And, you just understand the fun part of it when we're visiting, but it's not like that. It's not, everybody is not nice and everybody doesn't have great hospitality. And so I stewed for a while. And then eventually he said, well, if that's where you want to move to, then, we can do that. And it was, he came kicking and screaming. He really did. Literally. This is his hometown. I had no clue of any parts of Mississippi. I don't have. Now, my parents, I know that my grandparents, they originated in Alabama. And then my grandfather, my dad's father, he was from Memphis, Tennessee. And so that's as far back as my family history as I knew. But I had no roots in the South as far as I was concerned, and I wanted to move here. One thing I did love, I loved the hospitality, and it was like so serene. When we would come here, I would just feel a sense of peace when we would visit. And then at that time, my son, he was, becoming a teenager, and I really wanted to uproot him. I wanted them to see where their dad was from and the hospitality. My husband says, yes, ma'am, to me. He's, very hospitable, very respectful. And so I wanted my children to have that sense of how he was raised. So when we moved here, I says, get my son out of the community where he can be the gangs and things he can be so impressionable. Then now he's looped in. You can come from a very great family, a very prominent family. And it does not mean that you won't get tangled up into society, because as any child, you want to fit in. You want to try to be, we're not always taught that we don't have to fit in, right? To seem normal. And that's what drags a lot of our youth into situations of being in gangs and different things. So I didn't want that for my son. So I thought the South would be the best place, which it was. It was. He's driving trucks now. He has a CDL license, and he's getting ready to be his own owner operator and different things like that. My daughter, I just actually hired her to work for me after she had been in retail for a while. So the two the youngest one, 17-year-old, lives with me, but then the other two are on their own. And then, of course, the older children, they're out on their own. So everybody's, pretty much doing okay. They envy my move to Mississippi because we have since had our house built, and, it's just been, we're on 2 acres of land. And I mean, I just love it. I absolutely love it. So being in tourism, when I first started in tourism, I started as the marketing, sales and marketing coordinator. And that was at the end of 2014. And at the time, my director hired me to do the marketing and stuff like that. And so I enjoyed doing that for about 2 years. And in 2017, she resigned from her position. And then I was interim director for probably about 4 or 5 months before I became the actual executive director. And that's been my role ever since. What I found, though, in Holly Springs is that it does have a plethora of history and heritage. I can remember going home and telling my husband about things that, that the community, like there's a museum here, there's an Ida B. Wells museum, there's the Marshall County Historic. He said, I don't remember that. They didn't have all of that. As a matter of fact, the one street that we lived on, Park Avenue, he remembers as a boy, he couldn't go on that street unless he was cutting grass or doing some type of servitude. And so it was divided. So you would have some of the areas in town that he only could remember that the blacks couldn't come down. And I'm thinking, literally when he tells me these stories, I couldn't fathom, I couldn't fathom. There was a cafe that we used to frequent when we would come visit. And so I remember when we pulled up in front of this cafe, and I said, well, honey, let's go ahead and go in. And he said, well, we can't go in through the front. I'm like, and it had to be like 2000, it had to be like 2009 or 10. I said, yes, we can go through the front. What are you talking about? And he was adamant that he didn't believe that the South had changed any. And but he tells me now, he says, I thank you. I'm grateful that you brought me back where I originated from. He couldn't love it anymore than he does. And just getting him to understand, because that stigma, something from his childhood, things that he endured that I would never have experienced, traumatized him. And so it was only, and most people from the South did relocate north or, to other states. And so I'm learning to kind of bear with him and his thoughts of how things go and are, I absolutely love it. It's just such a serene town. I never knew of a square. I've never heard of a square, like when they're like the downtown historical square. I'm like, who has a square? I know we have downtown areas, but a square, But I've learned to absolutely love it. And of course, Holly Springs has a plethora of history. We have over 25 historic homes still standing. And I'm saying from periods of 1836, 1851, those circas of homes that are still standing even after the war. So to me, it says that when any other town got burned to the ground, I always say that God spared Holly Springs, because even though it burned a little, it did not burn completely like other towns, so that you've heard like in Natchez or, other Oxford, Mississippi, for, Corinth, Mississippi. So a lot of these towns during the war, during the raid of Van Dorn and so forth, a lot of these homes were totally burnt out and they had to start over. And then, of course, what really gets me is that we have a historical black college established in 1866. And for me, so we have a black college that was established in 1866, the second oldest in the state of Mississippi. And so the concept to me of race relations Well, it was allowed for blacks to have their own institution. So therefore, maybe the ideology of racism had begun to take a turn, right? Like, okay, maybe it wasn't with the intent. Maybe it was to monetize on an institution, but it still serviced people who otherwise couldn't go to the Holly Springs High School or to, other schools. So to me, it's like, I think that was kind of like the turning point of people getting an idea that they have to have just as much education as us, right? Because I don't think that if the idea of what people always say is, racism never ended. Well, it had to begin to change the scope of some things. Like I said, in 1866, even before the 1900s, here we have a historical black college. And I often think about, I wonder, during the yellow fever epidemic, what were the blacks doing, and so I'm delving into those, factors, trying to figure out, okay, what were the black people in town doing? And then you see the town, most of these homes were show homes. They would not have been slave homes. So they would always be out in the county, right? So most of the county homes were where you had your, people that picked cotton or that were farmers. But the big, beautiful homes, I don't know if you guys have seen it, Walter Place. That would have been a show home. And of course, it may have had servant quarters, but it would not have served as a place where they would have to do the labor that we think of when we think about enslaved people. So yes, they would have to serve, they would have to do those types of things. But in town, which this would be considered the city of Holly Springs, the city area, most of it was just for show. Because there were so many doctors, wealthy doctors and lawyers and everything back in the 1800s. At Holly Springs, when it was established, that there was plenty of wealthy people, and so they needed someone to, serve the children and cook the meals and so forth and so on. But the history that it has, you just get fascinated by it, and it's like you have to know, every segment of how that. I had this white guy tell me one time, his slavery didn't last that long here. And I'm like, what? You cannot dismiss the fact that it happened. It was here. It happened, even, just let's revert back to my husband really quick. Even when he would go to school, he would have to be bused outside of Holly Springs because of segregation, right? So you can't say, well, segregation only happened for 10 years. It wasn't as long, Things of that nature kind of grinds my gears because no matter what period of time it happened in, what the duration of time it was, it happened. And so, it's just, I don't know. It's something. Holly Springs is something. Have I experienced some sorts of racism? I'm an African-American director. I oftentimes say, I don't think it's because I'm black. I think it's because they want, sometimes people want control. And when you lose control, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, someone else just as white as snow can be sitting in my seat and someone else wants that role because, they feel like, I want to control the dollars or I want to control the, how things run. And so, but that's what I tell myself. My husband always says, it's because you're black. They don't want you in that position. And I'm thinking, ay.
I have a question. How does the culture from northern Mississippi, Holly Springs area, differentiate from other regions in Mississippi, such as in the south of Mississippi?
Honestly, it doesn't.
Okay.
It really doesn't. And I'm going to tell you why. When you think about the individuals that relocated from Mississippi to the North, they took the mindset with them. They took that with them. Even though it's a little, things probably move at a faster pace, education may be better, the mindset never changed. So you took whatever was embedded in you to another portion of the country. And so, you know what I mean? Do you kind of get what I'm saying? It's like, they took their eating habits with, the Southern food, soul food, even in Chicago, they have some of the best Southern cuisine that you can ever eat. So it doesn't really differ, but I think that northern or bigger cities, people move a lot faster. And so they are involved in things a lot more easier or faster than in the South. I mean, like some things that I have seen in Chicago, I've never seen here yet. You know what I mean? Yes, crime happens everywhere, of course, but not to the magnitude of how it is. And of course, we have to think about it in this facet. I'm living in a population of 8,000 people. That's not the population. When you're thinking about Chicago and we say, oh my God, so much crime, you have to realize that they quadruple the population here. I'm talking about by hundreds of thousands. So we normally negate that factor. When we say, oh, Holly Springs doesn't have as much crime as Chicago, well, it couldn't possibly. The population is not as, widespread. So,
Hi, Courtney Boyd. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your parents and what it was like growing up in the church with both of your parents being pastors.
Oh, what is it like now? I mean, like literally. So say for instance, if I'm angry about something, first of all, I always know that that was why it was my move here, my transition to Mississippi was so easy, because I was always taught to have faith. And when you come up in a loving home, and that's what you're taught, to love people in spite of, that's what you give no matter what. So you love people in spite of. And my mom was a stickler for that. We couldn't eat, when you're a kid and you would say to your sibling, you're stupid or you're ugly, Oh, that was totally something that we could not do. We could not say that. We couldn't watch BET. It was like so many, we were like, seriously, like, no cursing, fussing, fighting, nothing. But of course, we ventured off as, teenagers and adults and kind of did, because we wanted to be rebellious. Of course, every child wants to be rebellious if they're tight reins on you. But nonetheless, it was great when it was great. And sometimes I thought that it was a little bit too much. Like, come on, why do I have to wear a dress? But they still, all of those things that were instilled, it helps me to get along in a community where sometimes I don't feel that I belong in, you know what I mean? So it's like, it just helps me. If I'm loving and kind, then I feel like what I give off, the energy that I give off, it'll come back tenfold. So,
did your parents tell you stories of their childhood and things that they had experienced growing up?
Well, so my mom, as far as she's concerned, she had an awesome childhood. She was born in Chicago, and then they moved to California, and it was just, life was grand there. I don't know what made my grandmother want to move to California from Chicago, but she did. And my mom always talks about how fun it was. She never experienced racism either. I mean, as a matter of fact, my mom would always say, I don't know. And I'm being honest, I just never had that, especially coming from the West Coast. I just never gathered that. And so my mom grew up kind of in that same thing. Well, my dad's mom, she originated from Georgia. And of course, he remembers kind of hardships and things that transpired when he was a boy. But for the most part, all of his family, with their last name is Blitch, and the Bacons in Georgia were well off. And so, they remember riots and they remember things happening, but it didn't affect them directly. You know what I mean? Like if you see a sad movie on television, of course you're going to, because your emotions are going to allow you to feel in that moment what that person may have felt. Right? So when they're watching things like Roots or, whatever movies may have been out in that time that had portions of racism, of course, you're going to identify with that because I'm a black person. Like, I definitely can, oh my God, that is so horrible, But as far as being exposed to it, I think that for all of us, were very much sheltered. Even my parents were sheltered. So that's what hurts. That's what would hurt now if I had to experience a real good sense of being taunted or, of someone being racist. What I did experience being in tourism, I remember coming to work one day, and this was back when Obama was leaving office and, Trump was running. I walked up to the office door. I walked up the stairs and I seen a plastic bag, and it had like a note in there. It was a bag of rocks, like big boulders. And when I opened it up, it said, "Get out of there, nigger."
Wow.
And that, I was like, wow,
All right, sticking back. So a question that I have in mind here in the story of, the show homes and seeing that they are in a relatively short window before the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And you were saying that folks were working there, African-American Black folks, mm-hmm. in terms of servitude roles. And I had the question of, in terms of the labor of folks who built it, who would you consider having built it?
Of course, mm-hmm. the African-American built it.
Mm-hmm.
Who else?
But,
I mean, literally, who else? And so they built the home, and then they had the not so pleasure of having to serve the home. And so when we talk in terms of, when we talk about these beautiful homes and things like that, that's what always gets left out. Who built it? Whose labor was that? I mean, when you're talking about in the periods of, in the 1830s, 1840s, we didn't have that technology that we have now. And so you're talking about men and women and children that built it by hand, right? And the aesthetic and the structure, and they still stand. But, in the 21st century, we can build a house and it'll blow over tomorrow, and so that just tells you how wonderful of a people mm-hmm. African Americans were, how brilliant they were, even though they were mistreated at the magnitude that they were. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, just to make it fully clear, so it's like the same people that have so much of this knowledge to do everything from scratch now, then at the same time can also have the knowledge to maintain it and yes. leave us this legacy. So it's
absolutely, and that's what I think gets left out most of the times. I would have tour groups that would come to Holly Springs, and the majority, I have to be frank, are always white people. They're more fascinated with the history of history than Black people are. A lot of Black people want to leave it where it was, right? We don't want to talk about that. Who wants to relive that? It's one of those things where you have to ask, why wouldn't you want to know? Why is it such a thing of discord? But ultimately, you would consider that it would feel that way, yeah, right? I would feel that I don't want to delve into that because that's a place of hurt for me, right? Anywho, I had this the tour group, all white people. And one of the ladies asked after the tour, she says, now I admire the brilliance of the home. It's beautiful. She said, but why the hell aren't we talking about where the black people, what they were doing? And that's when I knew that the narrative and the story had to be changed, even in order to suit white folks, because they don't want to really hear a mint julep story, a Gone with the Wind type story. What were the blacks doing? If we're saying we have these white women in hoop skirts and drinking mint juleps and, everybody's, so fair and, la-di-da, where were the black people? And they never had that contrast until Behind the Big House, which Chilius was very, he was very brilliant in, incorporating that program. Because when we view these homes and we never consider the people that live behind it. Mm-hmm. So.
With these tours and some of these historic homes, has there been research to bring out pictures and names of people that were enslaved on the properties or anything like that?
Some. There are some homes where they have definitely delved into the history. They found ancestors and things like that. But we need more of that. There's a few homes where some of the owners just don't want to depict that portion of the history. So, but absolutely. I was just watching an episode of In the Heat of the Night, and this was just, and there was this huge plantation that they were getting ready to build on, right? So they had grazed it, the home was gone, everything's gone, and as the guys were out there grazing it, this guy kept finding artifacts. Right? They're digging. And this was in the 80s, right? And this show was, in the 80s. And so they're digging. And so I remember the young lady that was on the city council, she says, we need to garner some of those findings so that, because the story needs to be told. This is in the 80s. Now, this is a TV show. But as I'm watching this show, I'm thinking, oh my, how long have people been trying to preserve the African American history and heritage? And then, of course, you had the white man who owned the property that was getting ready to be built on. He didn't want any parts of digging and finding artifacts. Let's move on from there. Well, that's still the mindset of people. I don't want to delve into that. I don't want to dig into that. Why can't black people just leave it alone? Why can't we just let it go? That was so long ago. Well, the late 50s and the early 60s is not that long ago. If my husband is still living and he was born in 1960, that means time has not lapsed so much so that people don't have a remembrance of what those times were and how they were, So I think it's important that we preserve all of history, because whether it's Native American history, African American history, the Spanish American history. I mean, we all have a part and a role that we've played in the build of this country. Now, it may not be as in depth as the Afro-American because of the free labor portion of it. You know what I mean? So if you have someone that's going to work for free because you're making them work for free, then to me, that person or that culture needs to be reverenced. I had a guy tell me, well, the Native Americans had it just as bad. The Chinese Americans had it just as bad. But they weren't, they came over here at their own behest to this country, to this land. They were not stolen and then brought over to a country and then made to work as an enslaved person. And then this went on for years and years and years and years and years. And then even when they become free, you're still bound. Because now we're not going to give you a mortgage. We're not going to let you ascertain anything of significance. Yes, you're free, but you're not going to have the same things we have. So it's just, it's something. It's something to think about.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now moving towards the organization, Mississippi,
Roots and Wings?
Yeah, Roots and Wings. Can we talk a little bit about it and the work that you do, the challenges that you face, as some that we're hearing right now?
Well, North Mississippi Roots and Wings, because it's such it's in its baby stages.
Okay.
Of course, people are not going to want an organization to come in and be so hell-bent on just telling the Afro-American story, whether it's oral history, whether it's interviews like this. And yes, we're going to get some pushback. But I think that what people have to consider is when you get past the point of understanding that it's not just about the organization itself. It's about the stories that need to be told, that have to be told, that are going to be told, whether we want them told or not. North Mississippi Roots and Wings, we are getting ready to be a powerhouse within this county, meaning there will be no stone unturned to get to the bottom of what is the facts, what's actual, and what should have been told. People have left legacies here. People have ancestors that have done great things, but they never to be depicted or talked about. And so I think that we're all about preservation, heritage, history, and that's what we're going to do throughout this community. And it's going to be the challenging thing is going to be that it's not so much white folks, it's black that don't want to be a part of that, right? I just don't want to be involved. And so we already they're getting rid of history in schools. So who's left? The elders are left to tell the history or what they can remember. And so we need to get it all on tape. We need to get those things on record so that the generation of children such as mine, those Gen Xers and beyond that can still have some sense of, what was.
Okay. So I'm thinking, what are some of those preservation projects that you're working on currently, and how are you thinking about utilizing them in the future? Is it like in a museum, or how would?
Well, we haven't
ideas?
decided that yet,
Okay.
but we do have the Hugh Craft House. Very beautiful. It does have slave quarters on that property. As a matter of fact, that was where one of the Behind the Big House programs was conducted. And so we are going to utilize those for programs such as Behind the Big House, keeping that going, Juneteenth events, whatever we can utilize that particular property for. As far as the African American history goes, that's exactly what we intend to do. But yes, if we can have it as a museum, we do. I don't want to speak out of turn because there's a lot of things that haven't been voted on and meetings and different things like that, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. But absolutely, yes, we have great ideas for some of these properties around here.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history, how it was formed, who decided to create it, whose idea was it, how did it come out to be?
Well, it started in about 2012, and that was it wasn't during my tenure when it was established, but when I did come in 2014, Chilius Carter, which he owned the Hugh Craft House, at the time, he wanted to start in a group of individuals called Gracing the Table. And all Gracing the Table is that you had white people and black people getting together, sitting down at a table and talking about differences, right? Talking about things that hurt, African Americans being able to say, I don't like this, or, so that's what Gracing the Table was. So Gracing the Table and Chilius Carter, they got together and he decided to start this program because there were so many stories that needed to be told, just as Mr. Dale DeBerry is doing, and with his brick making, and and different things like that, so that the culture wouldn't be lost. So it started in about 2012. So the first year they did it, they ran consecutive with the annual pilgrimage. Well, that second year, the pilgrimage wanted nothing to do with the Behind the Big House at all. Which was sad because you have two versions of what the truth was. And you cannot tell one without the other. And so that was kind of disheartening. But, the pilgrimage went on annually, and then the Behind the Big House went on annually as separate events.
Okay. Can you tell us maybe some milestones within the program, within the organization itself throughout the years?
For North Mississippi
Yes.
Roots? Well, we just established last year.
So just last year. So right now it's...
It's very at the very beginning stages. And Larry, he's a true gem. He worked in the civil rights movement here with the SNCC project and everything here in Holly Springs. And that's why he has a great love for Holly Springs. He truly does. He worked at Russ College for some time. But I think that Larry thinks that he's black, and that's just what it is. And that's always what it's going to be. And, but he is absolutely, now that's someone that has made a tremendous difference in this community, binding people together.
Okay. I was thinking, I think you did bring about the challenges of like even the Black community in here having, difficulties kind of like talking about the history. Have you thought about like maybe some solutions on how to make, I'm just thinking based off your husband, how you said you changed his way, sort of the perception of what the community is.
Yes.
So how can you approach a similar approach with the community?
Well, first of all, people want to feel like they're getting something out of something, right? And so when you make people feel involved and a part of versus, I need you to tell me your story. No, what I want you to do is I want you to tell it from your version, from your perspective. Don't turn over stones while telling the story. Be your authentic self. And that way, individuals will understand that, it's about me. Right? Because if they have an inkling of a clue that they feel like it's about you, they don't want any parts of it. So we have to involve them and make them feel a part of, rather than just, we need something from you so that we can capitalize on this. Right? And that's another thing. We have to make sure that Blacks don't feel like, here's another organization coming in to capitalize on the African American heritage and history, and we don't benefit at all. So we have to make sure that they know that there's a benefit from them. We're leaving history for generations to come, and that, that to make them feel involved. So.
Okay. I have a question that we usually ask almost every interviewee that we interview, and it's regarding where do you see the organization within the next 10, 15 years?
Oh, wow.
Like if you could look, or five, since you're starting, where do you see?
In the next 5 years, I know that North Mississippi Roots and Wings will be known everywhere, literally, You guys heard about that organization in Mississippi, North Mississippi? Because that's just how much we know that we're going to pound the pavement to get those things and ideas. I don't want it to just be a thought, right? Thoughts are great, but when we don't act on them, then there's no benefit. And so that's clearly my stance is, we're not going to just continue to talk about, because everybody has an idea. When you're dealing with organizations, you're dealing with board members. And so everyone wants to bring something to the table, right? But we have to start at the nuts and bolts and then work our way to be able to fix the rest of the car. right? We can't, so I know that we're going to really flourish. When we have a couple of meetings with a couple of colleagues coming up of mine that are not necessarily from North Mississippi, but I need resources. We want resources. We want funding opportunities. We want all of those things that any other organization would benefit from. And so we have that in the works now. But 5 years from now, absolutely. North Mississippi Roots and Wings is going to be one of the liaisons for this community and abroad.
Okay, excellent. I'm not concluding yet, but I do want to ask you a question about regarding events around the Holly Spring region. What type of historical events occur in this region versus other regions that might have occurred that specifically are for Holly Springs?
So specifically for Holly Springs, well, we definitely have a Juneteenth celebration. We have MLK Day, which they kind of happen in other areas. It's really nothing specific outside of the blues that is differentiates from other parts of the United States. So everyone, African Americans that host events, everybody kind of hosts the same kind, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a Juneteenth celebration. We do have the Ida B. Wells, which happened to be born on July 16th, same day as me, in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And so she's a legend. And in Chicago, her name is great. Mm-hmm. In Memphis, Tennessee, her name is great. But in Holly Springs, her name gets lost. Mm-hmm. Her hometown, where she was raised. And so we have to add more value and significance. And I think that it's with any community, right? Mm-hmm. If you're from Chicago and you can say, I didn't even know we had that. Right. We don't know what's in our own back door, or we don't appreciate it, right? What someone would drive miles and miles away to see, we don't think that there's any value in that. And so we have to change our minds about that. But we have, the same typical events that everybody else has. Just trying to get, in Holly Springs, the majority of the population is African American. And so what I try to always think about is that I'm all about diversity and inclusion. And we also have to think about, you have to cater to your majority. Not saying exclude anybody, but you have to, because those are the people that are paying the taxes. Those are the majority of the folks that are, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it just kind of gets frayed, and it's such a gray area, with some things, but we have, Holly Springs is great. It has great stuff. I'm telling you, it really does.
Absolutely. Okay. With that said, I would like to pass it to my colleagues. Any questions?
Yeah, so thinking of the history and tours, where I guess I've sort of seen in a few places now. We're in Mobile not long ago, saw that there's a huge trail across the city, and getting to the point in so many of these places, people, you can do it yourself, you know where the stops are, etc. Being here and literally just taking a walk around the neighborhood, just seeing it there, something that comes to mind is, like you said, especially if you're directly descendant, so many people will just lead into naturally the shame of things, etc., etc. But for me, looking at it now, it's look at these folks. They have more knowledge than most people today.
Yes. And
on top of that, they were able to carry on forward. I mean, I've in an interview that I did a few months ago, a gentleman told me about his grandparents, where his grandpa was dig a well.
Oh, okay.
And those are things that are invaluable, and so
yes,
those gets lost too. So my question would be, how do you think that folks can not just learn on the history that's such a wretched time, but also connect to progress that's always been made by people that have always been pushing forward, no matter how hard they got it,
First and foremost, you have to acknowledge it. And so acknowledgement comes first. A lot of times, oftentimes, we don't acknowledge the part that African Americans played. It's always downplayed. It's it's almost as though they weren't so great that they could have done this on their own. right? They needed someone to tell them how to do, you know what I mean? So first it begins with acknowledging the fact that these people were genius enough to be architects without there even being a name for architectures back then, right? Blacksmiths and gun makers and all of these things that help civilization to thrive. And once that is acknowledged, respected, and not ignored, then we would be able to transition the then to the now. But if you don't have you don't hold on to some portions of the then, you're going to lose it in the now. So, yeah.
I'm curious with some of the tours and antebellum homes in the area. Do you have people that have traced their ancestry to certain locations?
Oh, yes.
In the area?
Burton Place is one of them. People have traced their heritage and history back to that particular home. As a matter of fact, even, they had the enslaved quarters in the back. Well, they had a list of names, and some of them, if they didn't have a name, you would just have a date, and then you would have like the surname or the last name or whatever they would call it at that time. But yes, they've done a really excellent job of gathering so much information, reaching out to those individuals or connecting with them to trace their heritage back here to Holly Springs.
That's great. Is there any plan for your organization to work on that?
Oh, yes. North Mississippi Roots and Wings would definitely be one of the liaisons in continuing that journey. As a matter of fact, the lady that's been doing a couple of segments with the group, she has ties to Holly Springs, but she lives in California. So it's like, oh my God, wow, Yeah, so it's absolutely amazing to just know that, oh my God, that was your ancestor. It is brilliant. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Have you had luck, or have people have had luck accessing archives from the families that own the homes, or how do they get to the information? And
well, a lot of it would be housed at the courthouse, like those old history artifacts of information. But a lot of times you just have to research and dig and research, because a lot of that information has become lost. Or a lot of times people don't want it found. Mm-hmm. I was traveling to, I was in Blue Mountain, Mississippi, and it's right before you get to Birmingham, Alabama. I stopped at a welcome center, and a lady said to me, she dug up some of the archives because she wanted to show me, and there was a bill of sale that she had found. And although the delivery was wrong, I appreciated her wanting to share it with me, but she said, "You people were expensive." Wow. I'm so sick. I cannot make this up. And she said, "They sold a slave girl for $500. That was a lot of money back then." And I appreciated that she shared it with me, because that was something fascinating, right? That we don't see every day. A bill of sale from the period of 1800. You know what I'm saying? So it's things like that, and that's why a lot of African Americans don't care to, you know what I mean? Because it's almost like a slap in the face of, yeah, but so what? Well, you're not a slave. You're not a slave. Or white people say this all the time. My folks didn't own any slaves. Well, your folks own slaves. Seriously. At some point, someone down that generational pipeline owned a slave or had someone enslaved working for them to some capacity. So, yeah.
Quick question. Have there been any threats or anything like that on that end? Researching all this, looking into the history.
Nope.
Nothing like that?
Nope.
Okay.
I mean, for the most part, people don't even know what you're doing, right? They could care less, until it becomes relevant, right, or prevalent in the community. And then like, oh, that's what they've been doing all that time. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, with that said, one more question.
Yeah, so since we're in Ada B. Wells' hometown and you both share a birthday, I figure I might ask if there's anything of relevance from her that you would like to share with us. Things that it's like, Holly Springs, like, wow, people should really know she did this here, or there's this thing that's related to her.
Well, she has a museum. First of all, she lived on the property where the museum is. And Aspires Bowling is one of the individuals that built that home. And it would have been considered they say plantation home, but plantations wouldn't have been in the city. So that's just always debatable, right? But where the museum stands is where her birthplace was. And so that is absolutely amazing. And then the yellow fever epidemic of 1878 that happened here in Holly Springs is what drove her to go to Memphis, Tennessee. If yellow fever never would have hit Holly Springs, then it probably would have been a different narrative, a different story, right? Her parents died due to yellow fever. And so she was left to have to care for her siblings, and she fled to Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. Well, at this point, I think I'm done with questions. But do you have any comments or anything that you would like to tell the world about the organization or about anything that you would like a message across?
Again, at the beginning, I stated that I am the executive director of Holly Springs Tourism and Recreation Bureau. We would love for anyone to come and visit our town. It's full of heritage and history. And of course, you're going to get a smidget of hospitality with that. And you can always visit us on the web at visithollysprings.com.
All right. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I did just that right before we came.